for them. The picketing continues, and there were arrests. News 4's David Diaz picks up the story in Farmingdale. David?
Yes, Sue, indeed, and this is a newspaper wholesale delivery outfit which makes its business by delivering various newspapers, including the New York Times, to places throughout Long Island. Now, the drivers, who are members of the Newspaper and Mailers Deliveries Union, say that they've been put out on the street after the company was suddenly sold, and that was following the drivers' rejection last night of a number of proposed contracts. Now, the drivers say that the new owner, Imperial Delivery Service, owned by trucking magnate Arthur Imperatore, has already begun bringing in replacement workers to drive the trucks. Now, all of this is part of what they call an illegal maneuver designed to get rid of the 176 union drivers here and crush the union.
Get you men out of the building because you don't work here no more. That's what do you mean we don't work here no more? Because I sold the company and you don't have any contract with the company. As you sold the company, we have a contract with this company that expires June 1, 1993. He's got to get out. I'm going to call police. Let's just call the police. The police came out and locked up, I don't know, 15, 20 of our guys, and the rest walked out of the building.
Okay, well, those workers have since been released. There is no one from the union inside now. A spokesman for management has been quoted in a published report as saying that there will be no further negotiations. Meanwhile, all of this threatens to spill out over into the city because the people who are the union workers here, the drivers of the same union that drive the New York Times trucks, the Daily News trucks, the New York Post, and other wholesale delivery outfits. The big question is whether the Times will be able to get any trucks out here tonight because, again, it's the same union that drives those trucks. So a labor dispute out here that threatens possibly all of the city newspaper deliveries inside New York. This is David Diaz reporting live in Farmingdale for now. Back to Sue and Chuck.
Thank you, David.
Still ahead as we continue. Deliveries in the suburbs.
Channel 2's Carol Iavana is live for us at the Times plant in Farmingdale, Long Island, with more details. Carol?
Well, Carol, that is the story. What is happening here is that people who live on Long Island and in Westchester may not be getting delivery of their New York Times tomorrow. Behind me, what is left of some 140 demonstrators who are members of the Newspaper and Mail Deliverers Union. They are trying to stop trucks coming from the city carrying the New York Times dailies from being dropped off here at the Wholesale Distribution Center in Farmingdale. And they have been, they say, successful so far. About 120 demonstrators are doing the same thing at the distribution center in New Rochelle. Now, the drivers say that they were locked out of their jobs this morning and replaced by other drivers, by the plant's new owner, Arthur Imperatore. He owns both of these distribution centers. The union members, against the recommendation of their leadership, rejected a contract that was agreed upon between the Times and Imperatore, and they say that's why they were locked out.
Our contract was rejected by the membership because it was a substandard contract with a lot of retrogressions, and the membership, in its wisdom, turned it down. So they, in turn, as opposed to going back to the bargaining table, they put replacement workers in. That seems to be the trend of the company, the trend of the country, because what's going on here is replacement workers are looking to take union people's jobs away, and we just can't tolerate it.
Okay, now that man there says that if any of the union drivers are going to be taking the New York Times to these distribution centers, he will order them not to go in. He says the dailies have not arrived yet. That should happen at about midnight. These people, what is left of them, will be here till then. Union leaders say that this is a volatile situation, and of course, over the next couple of days, everybody is hoping that some sort of an agreement can be reached. But the owner of the distribution center says, these people don't work anymore here. They say, yes, we do, and we're going to get back in. Stay tuned. I'm Carol Iavana reporting live from Farmingdale, and now back to the studio.
Stay tuned is right. All right, thank you, Carol, for the update. Carol.
Drivers with Teamsters. Those companies are supposed to deliver the Times to eastern Queens, to Long Island, Westchester County, and parts of southern Connecticut. Newspaper union drivers thrown out of work by the sales greeted trucks arriving in New Rochelle tonight with rocks. The drivers feel this confrontation was planned very far in advance.
Yeah, I think the New York Times and APA Trucking set this all up, and it was well orchestrated by both parties.
Earlier today in Farmingdale, newspaper union drivers attacked a New York Times truck delivering to the Farmingdale wholesaler. 14 people were arrested in that incident. The newspaper union drivers were removed one day after they turned down a contract with the new owner, Arthur Imperatore. The newspaper union drivers' rejection does not affect drivers delivering papers from the printing plants to wholesale distribution centers. And the New York Times reports tonight there may be some delays in their deliveries in Manhattan. Early editions have not arrived at some locations even yet.
But there is a crime wave that you may not have read about.
Suburban distribution. That touched off angry protests and rock and bottle attacks on New York Times trucks. At least 18 people were arrested at distribution plants in Westchester and on Long Island. And a water...
Dark suburbs this morning, despite a judge's restraining order to the contrary. Police say union workers have been trying to keep replacement drivers from delivering the New York Times by attacking delivery trucks in East Farmingdale and New Rochelle, to name 2 locations. Nearly 24 drivers were arrested yesterday. 240 workers were fired yesterday after they rejected a contract. Protests also affected other New York papers, which arrived late or didn't show up at all on some suburban newsstands and lawns.
We're coming right back from a...
Escorted trucks past shouts and jeers. As the anger that marked the first day of this labor dispute continues, despite a temporary restraining order prohibiting picketers from obstructing the delivery of the New York Times. Yesterday and early this morning, members of the Newspaper and Mail Deliverers Union smashed truck windows and threw rocks and bottles at any vehicles that tried to pass through a picket line set up at 2 wholesale distribution centers in New Rochelle and East Farmingdale. The centers distribute the Times, Daily News, Post, and other papers to parts of Westchester and Long Island. They were recently acquired by Arthur Imperatore, a new owner who decided to bring in a new workforce of drivers when the more than 200 operators at both sites rejected a contract he put on the table. In the violence and disruption that followed, 18 people were arrested, at least 1 replacement driver was injured, and copies of the Times arrived late to several newsstands.
We're supposed to have delivered and sold 230,000 copies today, and only 90 or so got out.
Officially, the union says it will abide by the court order at least until Tuesday, when a judge can hear the case. Meanwhile, other union leaders are worried that this dispute could lead to a shutdown of the New York Times, as well as having an impact on other papers in the city.
If it's not handled correctly, we could have several papers in the city not be in service to the public.
The New York Times says this dispute is between the drivers and an independent wholesaler and should not have a dramatic impact on the paper itself. But the paper helped negotiate the contract these workers rejected. Many fear this dispute is part of a hidden agenda to break the union, a charge the paper vehemently denies. David Navarro, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
We tried contacting the new owners of the distribution company today, but our phone calls were never returned.
An undercover...
The Times went to court earlier today because of a labor dispute. It involves wholesale distributors and drivers who are afraid of losing their jobs. David Diaz has the latest now from the newsroom for us. David?
Yes, Chuck, and a federal judge has now ordered drivers at the New York Times to make deliveries of the paper as directed to any wholesaler facility. Now, last night, the same judge issued a temporary restraining order against the Newspaper and Mail Deliverers Union. But the drivers still managed to cut the Times circulation to Westchester, Long Island, and Connecticut by 60%. The dispute centers around wholesale delivery companies that changed ownership and locked out union drivers when they refused to ratify a new contract which had been approved by their leaders. Those workers belong to the same union as the drivers at the Times, who refused to take the papers into the wholesalers, saying they feared violence. The papers were then shifted to other trucks being driven by replacement workers. One of those trucks was struck by a rock as it moved along the LIE, injuring the driver. Others got through only under police escorts. The net result was that only 90,000 of the 230,000 papers normally delivered to suburban locations got through last night. Today, the New York Times took pains to point out it was not on strike.
The New York Times is not on strike. We have contracts with all our unions, including the drivers. Second, the actions taking place involve an independent wholesaler whose job it is to distribute the New York Times and many other newspapers in parts of the suburbs.
The union, however, sees close links between the Times and the new owners of the wholesale firms.
He said none of these actions that the Times have taken are aimed at union busting. Of course not. The Easter Bunny was around last week, too.
Well, nevertheless, the union says it will obey the court order, and the Times says that if the order is enforced, it should be able to get its full complement of papers delivered tonight. Of course, we won't know whether that's true or not till tomorrow. Chuck, Sue?